The glass of red wine didn't just spill. It felt like an explosion against the pristine white of Nia's uniform. The liquid was cold and cloying, soaking through her thin button-down shirt and sticking to her skin like a brand of shame. Around her, the hushed murmurs of the city's elite died instantly. The high-ceilinged dining room of the Gilded Rose became a vacuum of silence, broken only by the heavy, rhythmic breathing of her manager, Damien Crowell. Nia stood paralyzed, her petite frame trembling as the wine dripped from her chin onto the polished floor. She didn't look up. She couldn't. Her eyes were fixed on the reflection of the chandelier in the puddle at her feet, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. She had worked 18 hours straight. She had been thinking about her mother's empty medicine cabinet, the overdue rent, and the flickering light in their cramped apartment, and for 1 second her focus had slipped. "You're a mistake, Nia," Damien hissed, his voice a low, jagged blade that cut through the silence. He leaned into her space, his expensive cologne masking the scent of the malice rolling off him. "Every cent you earned this week is mine now. Consider it a fine for the dry cleaning you've just cost this establishment. Now, get out of my sight before I decide to make this permanent." He didn't notice the shift in the room. He didn't see the man at table 4 slowly set down his crystal tumbler. Park Joon-woo rose with a lethal, feline grace, the sharp line of a tattoo peeking from his collar as he adjusted his midnight black blazer. While the rest of the room looked away in discomfort, the most dangerous man in Seoul took a single step toward the light, his cold, obsidian eyes locked onto the girl shivering in the wine-stained rags of her dignity. If you love intense stories like this, stories filled with power, betrayal, and unexpected twists, please make sure you like and subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. The heavy glass doors of the restaurant swung shut behind them, cutting off the suffocating heat of Damien's rage, but the night air offered no relief. It was biting and sharp, stinging Nia's wine-soaked skin. She felt a firm, steady hand on her elbow, not pulling her, but grounding her as she was guided toward the long, obsidian-black sedan idling at the curb. A driver moved with ghostly efficiency to open the door, and before Nia could find the words to protest, she was sinking into the deep, heated leather of the backseat. The door closed with a muted, expensive thud that seemed to silence the entire world. Beside her, Park Joon-woo settled into the shadows. He didn't speak. He didn't look at her with the pity she so loathed. He simply tapped a button, and the partition slid up, sealing them in a private chamber of cedarwood and silence. For several blocks, the only sound was the low hum of the engine and the rhythmic click of the windshield wipers. Nia stared at her reflection in the tinted window. She looked like a ghost, her dark skin smudged with dried wine, her hair a chaotic crown of dampened curls. The adrenaline that had kept her upright in the dining room began to ebb, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache. "You're shivering," Joon-woo said. His voice was a rich baritone, calm and devoid of the jagged edges she had come to expect from men in power. He reached beside him, draping a heavy camel hair coat over her shoulders. The warmth of his scent, something like rain and expensive tobacco, wrapped around her, and the first sob escaped her throat before she could choke it back. I can't lose the week," she whispered, her voice cracking as she clutched the lapels of his coat. "He took it all, every hour I worked. He took it for a spill I couldn't help." Joon-woo turned his head, his sharp jawline silhouetted against the passing streetlights. "Tell me why a woman who works 18-hour shifts makes 2 mistakes in 2 days. It isn't because you are careless." Nia wiped a stray tear with the back of her hand, leaving a faint crimson smear from the wine. "My mother," she started, the words tumbling out now that the dam had broken. "The clinic in our district. They won't refill her oxygen tanks until I pay the arrears. I haven't slept in 3 days because I have to stay awake to listen to her breathing, if it stops or if it gets too shallow." She trailed off, her chest heaving. "The manager knows. He knows I can't quit, so he finds reasons to deduct. A late arrival, a dropped napkin, a wrong order. He calls it discipline. I call it a slow death." Joon-woo's expression didn't change, but Nia noticed his hand tighten on the armrest, his knuckles turning white. He had spent his life surrounded by monsters, but there was a specific, cowardly brand of cruelty in Damien Crowell that clearly disgusted him. He realized then that the clumsiness he had witnessed wasn't the result of a lack of skill. It was the physical manifestation of a breaking heart. "The money is a ghost, Nia," he said quietly, his obsidian eyes locking onto hers with a sudden, terrifying intensity. "From this moment on, you will never count pennies for her life again. I don't give to the desperate. I invest in the resilient. And you are the strongest person in that room tonight." As the car turned toward the flickering neon of the poorer districts, Nia felt a strange shift in the air. For the first time in years, the crushing weight on her lungs felt a fraction lighter. The sedan navigated the narrow, broken ribs of the city's forgotten outskirts, where the neon glow of the central districts faded into the flickering hum of dying street lamps. When the car finally came to a halt, the silence was heavy. Joon-woo stepped out into the biting air, his polished shoes contrasting sharply with the cracked pavement and the scent of damp concrete. He looked up at the crumbling apartment complex, a gray monolith held together by rusted fire escapes and desperate hope, then turned to Nia. He didn't say a word, but the slight tilt of his head was an invitation to lead the way. The climb was 4 flights of stairs that groaned under their weight. The air in the stairwell was thick with the smell of old cooking and cleaning chemicals, but as Nia unlocked the door to her unit, the atmosphere shifted to something sterile and strained. The apartment was small, a single room divided by a faded curtain, but it was meticulously clean, a final stand against the encroaching decay. Joon-woo entered, his presence instantly making the space feel smaller, yet strangely more secure. He didn't look at the peeling floral wallpaper or the mismatched furniture with the judgmental eye of the elite. His gaze moved directly to the corner where a thin, elderly woman lay beneath a mountain of knitted blankets. Beside the bed, a rhythmic, mechanical hiss filled the room, the sound of an aging oxygen concentrator struggling to pull life from the air. Nia rushed to the bedside, her hand reaching out to touch her mother's forehead. "Mama, I'm home," she whispered, her voice trembling. The older woman's eyes fluttered open, glassy and tired, but they widened in confusion as they drifted to the tall, shadowed figure standing near the door. Joon-woo didn't wait for an introduction. He walked to the bedside, his eyes scanning the medical equipment with a clinical, detached intensity. He saw the half-empty pill bottles from the discount pharmacy and the dented oxygen tanks stacked in the corner like spent shell casings. He saw the sheer exhaustion etched into the bones of both women. "The machinery is failing," he said, his voice a low vibration in the quiet room. It wasn't a question. It was an observation of a fact Nia had been trying to ignore for months. "I know," Nia breathed, her back to him. "The technician said the compressor is going. I was supposed to pay for the service today, but—" She stopped, her shoulders shaking as the memory of the wine splashing onto her shirt flashed through her mind. Joon-woo reached into his blazer and pulled out a sleek, encrypted phone. He made a single call, speaking in rapid, clipped Korean. His tone was one of absolute command, the kind that bypassed red tape and ignored the hour of the night. When he finished, he tucked the phone away and looked at Nia. "My personal medical team is 5 minutes away," he stated. "They are bringing a private ambulance. Your mother is being moved to the Seoul International Clinic. She will have a private suite, 24-hour nursing, and the newest respiratory tech on the market." Nia stood up, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I can't pay for that, Joon-woo. I told you I have nothing." "I am not asking for payment," he replied, his expression as unreadable as stone. "Pity is a useless emotion, Nia. It solves nothing. This is not pity. This is an intervention. You cannot fight a war if you are busy mourning a casualty that hasn't happened yet." He walked to the window, looking out at the dark horizon of the city. For the first time, Nia realized that his protection wasn't just about the manager or the money. He was clearing the wreckage of her life so she could finally stand upright. As the distant wail of a siren began to climb the hill toward them, Nia looked at her mother, then at the man in the black suit, and felt the terrifying, beautiful sensation of the floor finally stopping its descent. Before we continue, if this story is already pulling you in, please go ahead and like and subscribe. The Seoul International Clinic was a world of hushed voices, polished marble, and the soft hum of high-end machinery that didn't struggle or hiss. As Nia stepped into the private suite, the contrast to her cramped apartment was jarring. Her mother was propped up against a mountain of white, high thread count pillows, a lightweight oxygen cannula resting beneath her nose. For the first time in months, the gray tint had left her skin, replaced by a faint, healthy flush. When she saw Nia, a genuine, effortless smile spread across her face. A sight Nia had feared was lost forever to the grinding gears of poverty. Nia stood at the foot of the bed, her hand pressed against her mouth to stifle a sob of pure relief. She watched the monitor beside the bed. The numbers were steady, the green line of the heart rate rhythmic and strong. In the corner of the room, Joon-woo stood like a silent sentinel, his dark silhouette framed against the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the city's glowing skyline. He hadn't approached the bed, giving the two women their space, but his presence was the very foundation upon which this miracle was built. "She is sleeping deeply now," Joon-woo said quietly as Nia eventually stepped out into the hallway, her heart still hammering with a mix of gratitude and awe. "The doctors say the exhaustion was as much a threat as the lungs. She needs rest without fear." "I don't know how to thank you," Nia whispered, her voice thick. "I keep waiting for the catch. People like you, people with your kind of power, they don't just do this for waitresses." Joon-woo didn't answer immediately. He gestured toward the elevator, and they descended to the ground floor, emerging into a private rooftop garden reserved for the clinic's elite guests. The air was cool, scented with pine and damp earth. He led her to a small stone table where 2 steaming cups of coffee had already been placed by an invisible staff. As they sat in the moonlight, Nia watched the way the shadows played across his face. On the street, or in the restaurant, Joon-woo was a man who radiated a cold, predatory energy, a man who could end a life or a business with a single nod. He was dangerous to the world, a storm contained within a bespoke suit. But here, in the quiet of the garden, that same power felt like a fortress. He was a sanctuary, a wall of iron between her and the cruelty of the life she had been living. "I didn't do this because you are a waitress, Nia," he said, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "I did it because I recognize the look of someone who has been fighting a war alone. My world is full of people who take. It is rare to find someone who only gives, even when they have nothing left." They sat in a comfortable, heavy silence, the steam from their coffee rising into the night air. For the first time in 5 years, Nia didn't feel the need to check the time or calculate her bus fare. She looked at the man across from her, the ink on his neck, the stillness of his hands, and realized that while the rest of the city feared the name Park Joon-woo, she was the only one who knew how gentle his shadows could be. A bond was forming, not built on debt, but on the recognition of 2 souls who had survived the dark in very different ways. The heavy glass doors of the Gilded Rose felt heavier than usual as Nia pushed them open the following afternoon. The lunch rush had subsided, leaving the dining room in a state of eerie, expensive calm. The scent of truffle oil and floor wax, which used to make Nia's stomach knot with anxiety, now felt distant, like a memory of a life she was already outgrowing. She wasn't wearing the stained white button-down today. She was in a simple, clean dress, her shoulders squared, though her heart still hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Damien was at the host stand, obsessively straightening a stack of menus. When he looked up and saw her, a slow, ugly smirk spread across his face, the look of a man who believed he held every card in the deck. "Well, if it isn't the star of last night's dinner theater," Damien drawled, his voice carrying just enough to make the remaining diners glance up. He didn't offer her the courtesy of stepping into the office. He wanted this to be public. "I assumed you'd be too busy scrubbing red wine out of your hair to show your face here again." "I'm here for my final check, Damien," Nia said, her voice low and remarkably steady. "And the tips from the last 2 weeks." Damien let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh, leaning over the podium until he was inches from her face. "Tips? You've got a lot of nerve, Nia. After the scene you caused, after the dry cleaning bills and the potential loss of a high-profile client at table 4, you're lucky I don't sue you for damages." He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled envelope, tossing it onto the mahogany surface between them. "There's your check. I deducted for the wine, the broken glass, and your early departure. It's barely enough for a bus pass, but then again, I saw who picked you up last night." He straightened his tie, his eyes gleaming with a petty, judgmental light. I've seen girls like you before. You think because some guy in a flashy suit felt sorry for you for 20 minutes, you've hit the jackpot. But men like that. They like the charity case for a night or two, then they realize you're still just a waitress with a dying mother and a leaking roof. He'll drop you back in the gutter by the weekend, and don't bother coming back here when he does. Nia looked at the envelope, then back at the man who had spent months making her feel small. For the first time, she didn't see a powerful boss. She saw a small, frightened person who could only feel tall by standing on others. She didn't reach for the money. "You're right about one thing, Damien," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "The man who picked me up last night doesn't like charity. He likes justice." Damien laughed again, a sound full of arrogance and ignorance. He had no idea that while he was counting the pennies he'd stolen from her envelope, a silent, legal tidal wave was already rushing toward the restaurant. He didn't know that the temporary boyfriend was currently signing documents that would erase Damien's authority by nightfall. "Get out, Nia," Damien sneered, turning his back on her. "Go enjoy your little fairy tale while it lasts. I have a restaurant to run." Nia turned and walked toward the door, leaving the envelope on the stand. She didn't need his scraps anymore. As she stepped out into the sunlight, she saw the black sedan waiting at the curb, and she knew that when she returned to this building, it wouldn't be to ask for permission. High above the city, the atmosphere in Park Joon-woo's office was one of clinical, absolute silence. Unlike the chaotic, ego-driven noise of the Gilded Rose, power here didn't need to shout. It hummed in the soft whir of high-speed servers and the rhythmic tapping of a fountain pen against a mahogany desk. Joon-woo sat motionless, his silhouette framed by the sprawling glass window that looked down upon Seoul like a chessboard. To the world, he was a ghost in a bespoke suit, but today he was a surgeon, meticulously deconstructing a tumor. Spread across his desk were digital tablets glowing with the financial entrails of the restaurant. His lead accountant, a man who spoke only in percentages and cold facts, stood at a respectful distance. Joon-woo didn't just want to buy the building. He wanted to own the ground it sat on, the air within its walls, and the very future of the man who ran it. "The holding company is over-leveraged," the accountant murmured, sliding a file forward. "Crowell has been playing a dangerous game with high-interest loans to maintain the appearance of luxury. It only took 3 phone calls to buy out the primary debt holders. By noon, you were the majority stakeholder. By 2, you own the deed to the land." Joon-woo's eyes remained fixed on a particular set of ledgers. His long fingers traced the discrepancies between the gross service charges and the employee payouts. A cold, hard light flickered in his obsidian eyes. "Look at the tip distribution," he said, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. "The math doesn't settle." The accountant nodded. "We found a secondary set of books hidden within the POS system. Damien Crowell hasn't just been strict with his staff. He's been systematic. He's been skimming 40% of the service pool for the last 5 years, funneling it into a private offshore account to pay for his personal debts. It's not just management, sir. It's grand larceny." Joon-woo leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking softly. He thought of Nia, of her shaking hands, her wine-stained shirt, and the way she had looked at a crumpled envelope containing the scraps of her own hard labor. He thought of her mother, gasping for air in a room that cost less than the watch on Damien's wrist. The cruelty wasn't just a personality trait. It was a business model built on the blood of the vulnerable. "He didn't just steal their money," Joon-woo said, more to himself than the accountant. "He stole their time. He stole the moments they could have spent with their families, the medicine they could have bought, the sleep they never got." He picked up the fountain pen and signed the final acquisition paper with a sharp, decisive stroke. The ink was dark, permanent, and final. To Damien Crowell, this was just another Tuesday of bullying waitresses and counting stolen cash. He had no idea that the silent partner he had always feared was no longer a shadow on the wall, but the new master of his house. Joon-woo closed the file, the sound like a gavel striking a bench. "Prepare the termination and restitution contracts," Joon-woo commanded, rising from his seat. "I want every cent returned to the staff with interest, and keep the deed in a separate folder. I have a very specific recipient in mind for the grand opening." The gold-lettered sign on the front door of the Gilded Rose had been flipped to closed for private event, yet every chandelier in the dining room was dimmed to a low, amber glow. The restaurant was empty of its usual chattering socialites, leaving an oppressive, heavy silence that amplified the sound of Damien's own heartbeat. He stood by the kitchen doors, his palms sweating. He had been told a high-profile VIP had bought out the entire evening, but he hadn't been told the guest had requested the manager, and only the manager, to provide personal table service. When the front doors opened, the cold night air rushed in, followed by the rhythmic, heavy tread of polished leather on marble. Park Joon-woo walked in alone. He didn't look at the menus. He didn't acknowledge the opulent decor. He simply walked to the center table, the same spot where Nia had collapsed in shame just 48 hours prior, and sat down. "Good evening, Mr. Park," Damien said, his voice hitching as he hurried over, a white linen napkin draped over his arm. "It is an absolute honor to—" "Water," Joon-woo interrupted, his voice a flat, freezing line. "Room temperature, no ice." Damien scurried to the sideboard. His hands, usually so steady when he was pointing them at others, trembled as he poured. When he returned to the table, he leaned over to set the glass down. "Stop," Joon-woo said. Damien froze mid-pour. "Sir." "The angle of your wrist," Joon-woo observed, leaning back and crossing one leg over the other. "It's sloppy. You're tilting the glass too far. If you continue, you'll splash the linen. Is this the standard of discipline you maintain here, Damien? Or is it only the women you expect perfection from?" Damien's face flushed a deep, humiliated crimson. "I apologize, sir. I'll be more careful." "Careful isn't enough," Joon-woo replied. He didn't look at the water. He looked directly into Damien's eyes. "Pour it again." For the next hour, the restaurant became a psychological cage. Joon-woo ordered a multi-course meal but barely touched a bite. Instead, he scrutinized every movement Damien made. He critiqued the way the silver was laid. He complained about the loudness of Damien's footsteps. He made him stand perfectly still for 20 minutes while the soup grew cold, just to see if his posture would break. It was a mirror, a slow, agonizing reflection of the psychological warfare Damien had waged against Nia for years. Every time Damien tried to speak, to offer an excuse or a pleasantry, Joon-woo would cut him off with a reminder of a deduction for a perceived flaw. "The wine is breathing too fast," Joon-woo said, watching a bead of sweat roll down Damien's temple. "That's a mark against your performance tonight. Perhaps I should deduct from your bonus just to ensure you stay concentrated." Damien felt the walls closing in. The weight of the tray felt like lead, and his legs ached from the forced stillness. He was beginning to understand the suffocating, narrow world he had built for his staff. He felt small. He felt disposable. He felt exactly like the girl he had poured a drink over. Joon-woo finally stood up, leaving the table untouched and the bill unpaid. He adjusted his cufflinks, looking at Damien with a mixture of boredom and disgust. "Service is a profession of dignity, Damien, but you've turned it into a theater of cruelty. Enjoy your evening. It's the last one you'll spend in this room as the man in charge." Before Damien could find his breath to ask what he meant, Joon-woo was gone, leaving him standing alone in the dim light of a kingdom that was no longer his. The following morning, the atmosphere inside the Gilded Rose was thick with a nervous, electric tension. The entire staff, waitresses with tired eyes, kitchen hands still wearing their stained aprons, and busboys who had grown used to flinching at the sound of a raised voice, stood in a loose semicircle in the main dining room. At the front of the room, Damien stood with his arms crossed, his face a sickly shade of gray. He had spent the night scouring his bank accounts, only to find them frozen, and he looked like a man who had already seen the ghost of his own future. The heavy front doors opened, and the room went silent. Park Joon-woo walked in, his presence alone enough to make the air feel colder and more pressurized. He didn't go to a table this time. He walked straight to the center of the staff gathering, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning the faces of the workers he had spent the previous day investigating. "I'll be brief," Joon-woo began, his voice carrying to every corner of the room without effort. Management of this establishment has changed hands as of 8 o'clock this morning. The previous holding company has been dissolved. The debt has been cleared. And the man who oversaw your daily lives is no longer in a position of authority. A collective, jagged breath went around the room. Damien stepped forward, his voice cracking. "Mr. Park, there's been a mistake. My contract." "Your contract was built on theft, Damien," Joon-woo said, not even turning to look at him. "The forensic audit is complete. The police are waiting in the foyer for a conversation regarding 5 years of wage suppression and tip skimming. You aren't a manager. You're a liability." Joon-woo turned back to the staff, his expression softening just a fraction. "A restaurant is not its walls or its menu. It is the people who keep it breathing. This place required a leader who understands the weight of that responsibility. Someone who knows exactly what it feels like to stand where you are standing." He gestured toward the entrance. The doors opened again, and for a moment, no one moved. Nia walked into the room, and the silence shifted from fear to pure, unadulterated shock. She wasn't the girl in the wine-stained shirt anymore. She was dressed in a sharp, tailored suit of deep navy, her hair styled in elegant, controlled waves. Her posture was no longer slouched. Her chin was parallel to the floor, and her eyes, once glossy with the threat of tears, were now clear and piercing. In her hands, she carried a thick leather folder containing the legal deeds and the new employment contracts for every person in the room. She walked past Damien without a glance, stopping only when she reached Joon-woo's side. He stepped back half a pace, a subtle movement that signaled to everyone in the room exactly who held the power now. "Good morning," Nia said, her voice resonant and warm, reaching out to her former coworkers. She looked at the senior waitress who had once shared her bread in the break room, and the dishwasher who had hidden his own fatigue to help her close. "My name is Nia Rowe. I am the new owner of the Gilded Rose, and our first order of business today is not service. It is restitution." She opened the folder, and as she began to speak of back pay and health benefits, the staff didn't just see a boss. They saw a miracle. Behind her, Joon-woo watched with a shadow of a smile, knowing that the sanctuary he had built for her was finally complete. The heavy oak door of the manager's office clicked shut, sealing out the stunned whispers of the staff. Inside, the air was stagnant, smelling of expensive leather and the sour scent of Damien's escalating panic. He stood behind the desk he had once used as a throne, his hands gripping the edge so hard his knuckles were white. Nia stood opposite him, the leather folder resting on the desk between them like a silent judge. "Nia, look," Damien started, his voice a frantic, high-pitched shadow of the bark he had used just yesterday. "We can talk about this. I was under a lot of pressure. The overheads, the investors, I had to make tough calls to keep this place afloat. You're a smart girl. You know how the business works." Nia didn't answer immediately. She looked at the desk, at the silver pen set she had once been too intimidated to touch, and then at Damien. The man looked smaller than she remembered. The predatory aura he had worn like a cloak was gone, replaced by the desperate, sweating reality of a cornered thief. "I know exactly how this business works, Damien," she said, her voice cool and steady. She opened the folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It wasn't a termination notice. It was a forensic ledger, highlighted in a surgical red. "I know that for 5 years, you've been taking 40% of the service pool. I know about the offshore account in the Cayman Islands. And I know that the pressure you felt was actually the interest on your own private gambling debts." Damien's eyes darted over the numbers, his face draining of what little color remained. That's private information. You can't use that. Joon-woo, he's a criminal. You're taking blood money." "I'm taking back what was stolen," Nia countered, stepping closer. The fear that had lived in her chest for years had finally evaporated, replaced by a cold, burning clarity. "This isn't about the wine you poured on me, Damien. It's not even about the pay you docked from my check while my mother was gasping for air. It's about Sarah, whose daughter couldn't afford her tuition. It's about Marcus, who walked 3 miles to work because he couldn't fix his car. It's about every person in that room whose lives you made smaller so yours could feel bigger." Damien sank into his chair, his shoulders slumping. "Please," he whispered, the arrogance finally shattering. I have nowhere else to go. I'll work for half pay. I'll train you. Just don't send me to the police. I'll do anything. Nia looked at him, and for a fleeting second, she felt a flicker of the old habit, the urge to be the good girl, to show the mercy she had been taught to give. But then she remembered the sound of her mother's failing oxygen tank. She remembered the collective exhaustion of the staff standing outside that door. "You're right about one thing," Nia said, leaning down until she was eye level with him. "You will do anything, but you won't be doing it as a manager. You're going to sit in that chair and you're going to sign the confession and the restitution agreement. You're going to return every cent to the staff, including the interest. And then you're going to leave." She stood up, looking toward the door where the silhouette of Joon-woo was visible through the frosted glass. He was a silent, lethal guarantee that the papers would be signed. The stakes had shifted. This wasn't a personal vendetta anymore. It was the restoration of a sanctuary. Nia realized then that power wasn't about the ability to hurt others. It was the strength to ensure they were never hurt again. The silence in the office was absolute, broken only by the ragged, uneven breathing of the man who had once treated this room like a fortress of his own making. Damien sat small in his chair, his eyes darting toward the door as if expecting the shadows to swallow him whole. Nia stood by the window, her silhouette sharp against the morning light. She looked down at the restaurant floor below, watching the staff move with a new, quiet purpose, no longer flinching, no longer afraid of the sound of their own footsteps. She turned back to Damien, her expression devoid of the anger he expected. In its place was something far more terrifying, a calm, unwavering clarity. She didn't see a monster anymore. She saw a man who had built his life on the hollow foundation of others' suffering. "I could have you arrested, Damien," Nia said, her voice steady and resonant. "The evidence of your theft is enough to ensure you never hold a position of trust again. I could watch you walk out of here in handcuffs and never think of you again." Damien flinched, his hands trembling as they rested on the mahogany desk. "Please, Nia, I have nothing left. Everything I have was tied to this place." "Exactly," Nia replied, walking slowly toward him. "You stripped everyone here of their dignity to pay for your own. You took their time, their health, and their peace. You think leaving with nothing is a punishment, but for the people you stepped on, nothing was the reality you gave them every day." She leaned forward, placing her hands on the desk. "So, I'm giving you a choice. One you never gave me. You can sign the confession, walk out those doors right now, and let the law take its course. You will leave with the clothes on your back and the shame of what you've done." She paused, her eyes locking onto his. "Or you can stay. You will relinquish your title, your salary, and your ego. You will go down to the kitchen, and you will work the dish pit. You will work until every cent you stole from the service pool has been paid back in full to the staff, with interest. You will learn the value of the labor you devalued. You will be the last person to leave and the first to arrive, and you will do it under the management of the people you once humiliated." Damien looked up at her, his mouth agape. The irony was a physical weight in the room. To stay meant to become the very thing he despised. To leave meant total ruin. In the doorway, Joon-woo leaned against the frame, his arms crossed over his chest. He watched the scene with a rare, silent pride. He had provided the tools, the legal leverage, the capital, the protection, but the fire was entirely hers. He had intended to save a woman from a storm, but in doing so, he had unleashed a leader who understood that true power wasn't found in destruction, but in the cold, hard application of justice. He saw the way she didn't look back for his approval. She didn't need it. She was the sun around which this new world would revolve. Damien's gaze shifted to the silver pen on the desk. With shaking fingers, he reached out and gripped it. He looked at the door, then back at Nia's unyielding face. Slowly, he pulled the restitution agreement toward him and signed his name, the ink scratching harshly against the paper. Nia took the document and closed the folder with a decisive click. She didn't smile. She simply stood tall, the owner of her own destiny, and gestured toward the door. "Go put on an apron, Damien. You have a lot of work to do." As Damien shuffled out of the office, his head bowed, Nia finally looked toward the door. Joon-woo straightened up, his obsidian eyes softening as they met hers. The blizzard was over. The wine-stained shirt was gone. And as they stood together in the quiet of the morning, Nia knew that the sanctuary they had built wasn't just a building. It was the strength they had found in each other to finally fight the world and win.